It really frustrates me how complicated we make things as web developers. And often designs systems that we start with are really big, complicated, monolithic, with hundreds and hundreds of components that are often just copy pasted from like Figma. But you don't need that. You don't need a massive design system. You can basically let your design system evolve from scratch. So let me show you how we do it here. So let me just refresh you what this program looks like and the design system. So we have our 4 routes here. We have some buttons. We have primary buttons, secondary buttons, squarify, and we have an outline button. We have the simple form that stacks horizontally and vertically. And just we have a simple Google Maps, just showing integration with a third party. So I'm going a bit slow with this video due to some feedback that I've had on the channel. And we're going to go quite slow this video, so this isn't going to be like a 4-minute video, it's going to be a bit longer. And we're just going to break down what we have here into the various parts. So let's just look at some of the elements and the common styles. So if we look at these buttons here, we can see this primary button and secondary buttons. And by the way, everything here translates also over to dark mode. So I'll just show you the appearance here in dark mode. I'm outside, so I'm just going to stay on light mode right now. So you see the differences between primary and secondary on dark mode. So basically primary buttons are those you want to drive more attention to. Secondary buttons probably used less of the time. Okay, so the first thing I'll point out to you here is that we want to reduce duplication and we want to keep things semantically. So if we look at this A tag here, you can see here that's an anchor and it looks pretty much exactly the same as a button, except that it has a squarify attribute here. But this button class is actually shared with this button here. You can see how the hover looks the same, but we haven't declared the styles twice for that. We're using common styles. So I've broke up some of the CSS into different files here. So we have this button CSS, which has the native button tag, and it has a .button class. And that .button class is what we actually use on the anchor here. And that makes the anchor look the same as the button. Now we could wrap this anchor, these two spans, icon and text, in a button, but that just doesn't really semantic. It's not behaving like a button, but and also sort of pollutes the HTML. Why have another nested tag with button there? So in terms of the layout of the side nav, if I can remember where it is. Okay, so we go to the index here, and then we have this body. So we have the body, and then we have that split up into the main and the footer. The reason that the footer is sort of outside of the main is that we wanted to have the sort of the full width here, and we're having a sort of sidebar first type layout. So the main does actually include the nav in it. Now you could split that up into a header and do it having the main probably in the router. Actually, I think that might actually be better, making the main just part of the router. So we can go and do that. So it's quite flexible, the code. So in a sense, what we could do is we could just change this here to a div, this main, and we can make this the router the main part. And for the nav, well, I guess we could put that to header, but there isn't really a header here as such, so I'm just going to leave that as it is. So let's just see if that still works. It should still work because our components work with just searching for data component, not looking for header or main or anything like that. So we can see here that this is jumped down like this. This is because the original div main was making the content at least 100%, so we have to fix that. So if we go into our common CSS, we should find a main tag there. Right, so now we need to adjust that so that the first div under the body has that property. So we can just do that with just body div, and that should fix that problem. Okay, that's fine. Now we'll just check to see that the main is the main still. So if I just click on the router print element, you can see now the main content just contains the router like that. So quite often when I work with companies, they hire a design team and they will create this massive bunch of components, hundreds of components, and then we'll be given them, and then we'll spend hours and days creating all these components in the DOM in HTML, but I think it's just better just to start with no design system, and as you go along, create the design system in the code, because this page here is quite simple. We don't need a whole bunch of buttons. We need to have warning buttons, success buttons, danger buttons, red, and all that stuff. We can just start to build our app with what we have, and then extend it as we go along. This Squarify button here, we didn't have that at the start. I did that in later on. It's an extension, and I'll show you how we do that. So we have this utility class where we keep things that can be reused many times, and I've based quite a lot of it on the way that you write things in Tailwind, because people are used to that. And I do like being able to put things like flex and column in the actual HTML versus separated out into the components that we have like on the side here. So this Squarify thing, basically I want to override any of our other styles, but I don't want to have to create like a bunch of specified selectors. I wanted to just use .squarify, which should override the rest of the attributes. So that's why we have important there. I don't see a problem if you use important, because it's part of the CSS. So if we just go into this button here, that's just a standard, and by default it uses primary colors, and the Squarify overrides the border radius. If we turn that off, as you can see here, it just goes back to normal Squarify. I'll go and show you the button CSS. So the button, basically it's all in here like that. Now, when using Tailwind purely, because you're not supposed to use apply, creating a bunch of Tailwind classes in like a CSS file, what happens is that you often just create these components like in React or Solid.js, and all you're doing there is putting the actual Tailwind classes inside of the actual elements, and then you're importing that component just to get the styling of the component. The component's almost doing nothing. So like, why not just skip the middleman? If you're just creating components that are behaving like normal components with no overriding, why not just make them all in CSS? You don't have to worry about Tailwind dependencies or new versions of Tailwind or migrating it. It will just always work. And you can see here, this code is very basic. We have all the variants, we have secondary, we have our outline buttons, and we have no colors in here. We're just using CSS variables, which is really powerful, because like in Tailwind you normally have to define your colors for the back. You have all this sort of markup saying dark mode and light mode and all this stuff. With the CSS here, we're just specifying the CSS variables, and those are controlled by our native media query import on the link relative style sheet. So this is so powerful. You don't have to, because even many design teams, they won't give you the styles in dark mode, and then if they do give you in dark mode, maybe 10% of the massive Figma project will actually be in dark mode. So you'll have to like go back and forth and questioning them. Just skip having a design team. If you're just building a simple web page, the simpler the web page is, the easier it is to migrate things. Often you'll also have companies with multiple design teams. There's no centralization of the design system. They have different competing design systems. Everybody creates duplicated code. Why not just make all of your design systems simpler and simpler and simpler? And you just do some basic standard things, like you create like a button padding around buttons. You have like a certain colors for different contrasts for primary and secondary, as you can see here. I just think this makes web development a lot more fun. Right, so let's just look at the form. So the form here, it's quite a basic form. It's using a grid layout that turns on to single column mode on width less than 600 pixels. So if you look at the form here, it is specified in a flex mode, just so we can have like a gap between the heading and the form itself. But within the form, we have this form grid, and you can see here how the things are spaced out nicely. And the nice thing about having a form grid is that you don't have to like work out the fixed widths of like the labels. The grid will just take up the size automatically if it's in auto mode, the column. Let me just show you that. So you can see here the grid specifies that on mode with 600 we have this column like this, and you have this expanding one here like that. And then once it gets to less than 600, it just turns off that rule. So your column will by default go back, your grid layout will go default to just one column. And then that's always easier for mobile view. And what I'll probably do is, because you can see here there's a media query of 600, it's reused multiple places. We can extract that out, we can create our breakpoints. So for example, if we go into our common here, we can just specify what our breakpoints are. And I'll probably copy whatever Tailwind CSS variables are, because it's probably the most commonly used. I'm not afraid to sort of borrow some nice things from Tailwind in terms of conventions, because people understand that, but I don't need to opt into this massive framework. Even though it outputs lightweight CSS, CSS nesting is just so powerful, I just do not need to use Tailwind anymore. You know, it's just, what we have here is just so much more powerful, I believe. Okay, so what else can we talk about in this design system that we have? So, well, you know, I'm not even creating classes for HTML. I'm just using the defaults for that, because, you know, it's fine using the browser defaults. I just want to have as little possible code as I can think of. You can see here the light and dark mode, as I talked about in the previous video here. We basically have a sort of inversion of each, and whenever, you know, even though probably these colors don't look right, I mean, they can be improved, but they can be improved in like 1 or 2 lines of code. You don't have to go back and be dependent on, you know, someone else's framework for colors. You know, you can just adjust these. You can go back and forth with a client. You can adjust things quickly here in the 2 places. So here's also some of the you know, the form. So this form, we don't have any markup in this form. It's very, very basic. So the form here is, we've got a route called this form. And you can see here there's like 0 styling. The only thing that's styled is like we have a class name to specify that this is a grid inside there. And you know, we could probably even extract that out to use the form here instead of the grid, and just even reduce the class names there. But we'll keep fixing this as we go along. But it's such a small project that the design system can be quite flexible. And it's of course can be reused. It's obvious what's going on here. We don't have to have extra markup in it. We don't have to have extra components for it right now. One thing I did with the router, actually, so we now have a convention that we don't have to go and create a map for each route. So if I go into the router, I can't remember where it is. Components, router. So this route paths overrides, I've now changed it to that name, so that by default, then whatever is in the href, it will just go by default to that folder. Or if we want to do something fancy, like probably some kind of query parameters or some kind of thing like that, we can also add it into these overrides, which I'll add later on. So you might not agree with me and say this isn't a design system, this is basically a starter project. Well, maybe so, but at least I can change things quickly. So let's just look at our utility class again. So we have some common things that we've got here, like flex column direction, the gap. What else? I've got some basic stuff for resetting stuff that, you know, we know what reset CSS is. I could just borrow that off the internet, but why not just control it personally here? In terms of the common, I'll probably extract that out as well and warrant to different files. It's okay having lots of different CSS files as well. So there's some defaults for things that are rounded. So the buttons actually share that. They share this, the squarify thing uses a rounded, but it's only 4 pixels, so it looks a lot more square than rounded full. We have some paddings defaults. This is in a sense design system, specifying how much space you want between things that are reused around the app. The body, this is basically default text for the light and dark mode. It's also a background color, which is basically black and white. We have our side nav here slides in. Our outer fills up all the space in the main. I have this default padding for the content. So if we just go into here, you can see that we have this padding around the edges. That just basically means you don't have to create a lot of individual paddings. And because it's a variable, then you can in a sense invert that if you wanted to have a negative padding or margin. So you can have a full bar that doesn't have any white spaces at the edges, for like maybe a sort of parallax effect div. Yeah, so you've got that side nav there that's basically sharing some colors, got the column layout, and min width. this hides the text below 600 below 600 pixels. We have that footer down there, down here. And here's our CSS files. Okay, we don't have a build system, but you know, why do I need to bundle things together? We have HTTP2, which is fast, so deal with it. And then we just have some basically structure for our nav and main and router and things like that. So that's basically the video. This isn't a long video. We don't have to make a long video because our design system is small. But yeah, it's powerful, and we'll keep adding to this and seeing what else we can add to this vanilla stuff to give you guys the skills. You don't have to rewrite your apps again and again and again, relearn lots of frameworks. We can already build quite complicated apps. Thanks very much for watching the video. Please leave a comment and like, share, and anything you want me to focus more on to explain, please let me know. Thanks for watching.